What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my top 24 Dynasty quarterback rankings. So in the last 2 days I've gone through my top 24 running backs, my top 24 wide receivers. Now we're locking in on the quarterback position. I'm also going to be splitting these quarterbacks up into tiers, and let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off in tier 1. I'm going to have two tier 1 quarterbacks. It's going to be Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. And in my opinion, these two are pretty clearly like my QB1 and my QB2. I think you can switch the order of them. I'm totally fine with that. For Josh Allen here, he's averaged over 23 points per game for 4 straight seasons. He's been the quarterback 1 in points per game in 3 of those 4 years. Doesn't have a great group of current weapons, but if guys like Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman can kind of step up and hit as rookies, or a second-year player in Kincaid, then he'll definitely be solid moving forward. And just the rushing upside, like he doesn't need top weapons to give you great fantasy production. For Patrick Mahomes, he is going to be coming off his worst fantasy season of his career, but I'm definitely expecting a bounce back. He has an upgrade with weapons. Who knows what's going on with Rashee Rice, but you have Xavier Worthy coming in, Hollywood Brown on a 1-year deal, and then obviously Travis Kelce re-signed there. He's put up 24 or more points per game in 3 of his 6 full seasons, and I think you could make the argument that, in the short term, Josh Allen's probably the better fantasy play, but I think long term, Patrick Mahomes' play style just has more longevity than Josh Allen. He's not rushing as much. He's not getting beat up as much as a guy like Josh Allen. Now shifting into tier 2, we're going to start off with CJ Stroud. Now, I think some people out there may think it's crazy to not have CJ Stroud in tier 1. Some people may actually just have CJ Stroud as their quarterback 1 overall. And he is coming off an amazing rookie season. He's like 5 to 6 years younger than both Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. But for me, it just comes down to his fantasy football ceiling. Stroud was awesome as a rookie, played super well from a real-life NFL perspective, and that led to 18.4 points per game. He just doesn't have the rushing production, in my opinion, to consistently deliver high-ceiling seasons. In 15 games, he had 39 carries for 167 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. He was 19th in carries at the quarterback position, 38th in carries per game, 20th in red zone carries, 27th in red zone carries per game, and then 31st in rushing yards per game. And at this point, just looking at his role with the Texans here, there's not a real need to up his rushing usage. They really didn't have a great run game last year, especially near the goal line, and they still didn't opt to use him there. Now you have the addition of Stephon Diggs. This wide receiver room is just absolutely stacked with Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. So I think he can be a very consistent mid-tier QB1 play for a very long time, but I just don't think he has that game-breaking upside, which is why I have him here leading tier 2. Now, right behind him, we're going back to a player with some rushing upside, and that's going to be Jalen Hurts. He's averaged 20-plus points per game in 3 straight seasons. He's finished as the QB6, QB1, and QB2 in points per game over that stretch. He has 38 rushing touchdowns over those 3 seasons, which is just insane production on the ground. And then the Eagles have also gone out and extended his weapons this offseason, locked down both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, so he's going to have that core moving forward. Still very young at 25 years old, so I think a very strong candidate here as my QB4. And then my final tier 2 quarterback right behind Hurts, we're going with Lamar Jackson here as a full-time starter, so pretty much just discounting his rookie season. His worst fantasy season is averaging 19.7 points per game. We know he has that crazy ceiling with his 2019 season. Obviously, that was a little while ago, but I mean, he was high 27, low 28 points per game, depending on your scoring setting. He has rushed for 700 or more yards in all 5 of his seasons as the full-time starter, and then he has a solid group of weapons here with Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, so in a good spot moving forward, has that ceiling, has the rushing production. You gotta like Lamar Jackson as a dynasty quarterback. Now pivoting into tier 3, a decent sized tier here. We're going to start off with Joe Burrow, my quarterback 6, and some people have him up in that tier 2 area with guys like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. I'm just not quite there. He is coming off of a rough 2023 season due to injuries, but we all know that Joe Burrow is a top real-life quarterback, but he's one of these guys who also kind of has a limited rushing ceiling. He'll still give you rushing production, like we saw it in 2022. He rushed for 259 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, and that's probably close to the ceiling, right? He hit in the touchdown department. Maybe he can get more yardage, but that's probably going to be a higher end rushing season for him. And I think you'll take that, right? That's good enough. It's not like a Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, but he's also not a statue back there. He definitely has some mobility. So I think it's a fair spot here at quarterback 6. I guess there's some concern with him coming off that wrist injury. We'll see. We've seen some conflicting reports. Like there was one report that was like, his wrist is never going to be the same. He'll always have to manage this. And then I saw like a fantasy doctor on Twitter kind of dispute that. So I guess there's still some stuff we have to wait and see there, but I think he'll be back to pretty much normal heading into 2024. Right behind him, I have Justin Herbert, and I feel like Justin Herbert might be like the most slept on player right now in the NFL. Even in a season where he dealt with injuries to his wide receivers, he still ended up being a back-end QB1 last year. The last 2 years have just been tough in general. Injuries to the wide receiver position. He's dealt with stuff. He had the rib thing. I think that was 2 years ago, and then he had the messed up finger last year. We cannot forget that Justin Herbert in his first 2 seasons averaged over 22 points per game. We talk about how amazing CJ Stroud was, and he was great. Fantasy-wise, Justin Herbert was much better as a rookie, so it feels like he's getting discounted because of, some unlucky circumstances over the last couple of years. Obviously, his current group of weapons is not great. We know that, but he's still a top-tier real-life quarterback, and, those things can rebound pretty quickly here. Right behind Herbert, going with Caleb Williams, and I think you could, make an argument that Caleb Williams should be ranked higher than this. He's just heading into an insane situation for a year 1 quarterback. This was a 7-10 team last year, which not a crazy record, but when you get the number 1 pick and you're 7-10, that's a pretty good sign. And then this offense added Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. You already had DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. Caleb Williams is a great quarterback prospect. He's not going to have the craziest rushing ceiling, but he's definitely mobile. He's probably, in that Joe Burrow area, maybe a little bit more mobile in terms of the rushing production he can bring you, but he's definitely not a zero there. So I think Caleb Williams, very solid guy here as the QB8. Right behind him, I'm going with Anthony Richardson. He played in 4 games as a rookie, averaged over 18 points per game, which if that was his rookie year, I think you'd be happy with it. Obviously, you'd prefer to see the full season. But in those 4 games, he actually left before halftime in 2 of those, which makes that 18 point per game number even crazier. In that small sample size, I know it's only 4 games, or pretty much 3 games if you consider the halves he missed. But he definitely looked like the quarterback of the future here for the Colts. I think he has a crazy high fantasy ceiling. He has elite rushing upside. I think he's probably the best athlete to ever play the quarterback position. His athletic testing definitely backs that up. And then he has solid weapons around him. Obviously, JT in the run game, a solid offensive line, Pittman, Downs, Mitchell at the wide receiver position. He's in a great spot moving forward. And then my final tier 3 quarterback is going to be Kyler Murray. I think he's one of the more underrated quarterbacks in Dynasty. He's been a QB1, a top 12 quarterback in all 5 of his seasons. He averaged 18.3 points per game last year off a torn ACL, which meant his rushing upside was limited, and had, pretty limited weapons in terms of the guys he was throwing to. Now you add in Marvin Harrison Jr. Trey McBride was absolutely balling towards the end of last year. He gives you that rushing upside. I think Kyler is definitely slept on as a dynasty asset. Now, pivoting into tier 4, we're going to start off this tier with Jordan Love. Definitely a massive riser from last season. Heading into the year, you really didn't know what to expect out of him. He sat behind Aaron Rodgers for a few years, finally got his opportunity, ends up being the quarterback 5 in points per game. I think you can make an argument that Love should be higher than this. Maybe you want him in tier 3. Not going to push back super hard. He's 25 years old. He's in a great offensive situation here. Very, impressive offensive-minded head coach. He has a ton of young weapons with Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and then they're also added to the running back position with Josh Jacobs in free agency, and then Marshawn Lloyd at the running back position. So someone who I think is definitely trending up moving forward. Right behind him, I'm going with Trevor Lawrence. He was a back-end QB1 in 2022, a high-end QB2 last season. I think it's fair to say, fantasy-wise and real-life NFL production, it's been a little bit of a disappointing start to his career, but I truly do believe that better seasons are ahead here. I think he's in that second tier of rushing production where he can give you 300-plus yards, a few touchdowns. He's a big dude. He can get into the end zone. We just haven't seen him hit a big passing touchdown season. He's capped out at 25. I don't think that's something that's going to continue here. Decent group of weapons heading into next year with Ingram, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Watson. Not a huge Gabe Davis guy, but as your wide receiver 3, I think he's fine. Travis Etienne. So I think we could definitely see him take a leap this year, and I do think he still belongs here as a top 12 dynasty quarterback. Then we're going to have back-to-back rookies here. We're going to start off with Jaden Daniels, my QB 13. I think there are definitely some concerns with drafting Jaden Daniels. He's certainly not a perfect prospect, but you cannot deny that his fantasy ceiling is very, very high. He has the rushing upside to compete with guys like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Fields, Hurts, Richardson. Like, I truly do believe that. His college rushing production was truly top tier. I think you're just in this spot where you're hoping he can maintain the job long term, right? Because I think as soon as he steps on the field, he's going to give you nice fantasy production. You don't even need, if you have that rushing upside, you don't need to play at a super high level from a real life perspective to still give solid fantasy production. But the question is, like, a guy like Jalen Hurts, he came in, he put up fantasy points, but there was no guarantee he was holding on to that starting job. He ends up securing that starting job, and now he's viewed as, a top 5-6 dynasty asset, right? Like, he is really up there. On the contrary, you look at a dude like Justin Fields, who got that opportunity, produced fantasy-wise, but now he doesn't have a starting job, is going to be backing up Russell Wilson and the Steelers. So is Jaden Daniels like the Jalen Hurts, or is he the Justin Fields? Can he, turn that fantasy production into like a long-term career as a starter, or is he, going to, kind of slip, struggle? We'll just have to wait and see. That's kind of like the risk reward you get here with drafting him. And then the final player in this tier, I mentioned a rookie. It's going to be Drake May, another prospect who's not perfect, has some flaws, but I think he also has some pretty nice fantasy upside, really good arm talent, and also has some mobility, some rushing upside. Not a great landing spot with the Patriots, but there's definitely a path that this turns into a fine landing spot. You've got young weapons there with Jalen Polk, Demario Douglas, Javon Baker. So he's got some guys there, especially if they pan out. It could end up being a decent unit. Now, pivoting into Tier 5, we're going to start off with Dak Prescott, and I think there's a strong argument that he could slot in, towards the bottom of Tier 4. He's put up 20-plus points per game in 4 of his last 5 seasons. I do think he has somewhat of a capped ceiling. Like, he hasn't gone over 22 points per game over a full year. He had the one stretch of like 5 games before he had a season-ending injury where he was like 26 points per game, but that was pretty unsustainable. He's going to be 31 when the season starts, so definitely the oldest quarterback we've talked about so far. I think if you're in a win now mode, he's a great option for you. If you're rebuilding, maybe you go with one of the younger options. Right behind Prescott, going to go with J.J. McCarthy. I think this is a great landing spot here with the Vikings. Kevin O'Connell at head coach, Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson as weapons. He is fairly raw as a prospect. People really criticize him because he didn't have like great college production. And I think it's fair, right? He wasn't asked to carry his offense like the 3 other rookies. But when you're looking at him, there's also not a ton of like blatant flaws where you can just like shred him as a player. The question is just like, is he going to be able to take on, more responsibility in the NFL? I don't think he has the same, fantasy ceiling just because he doesn't have the rushing production of some of the other rookie quarterbacks, but I think he's in a great position to succeed here. Like, if you could pick a landing spot for a quarterback-needy team, it probably would have been here. Maybe the Bears, but I think with the Vikings, you have the combination of the weapons and the coaching staff that you really, really trust. So he's in a great spot. Once he gets on the field, we'll just see if he's able, to perform at an NFL level. And then the final quarterback in this tier is going to be Brock Purdy. He was the quarterback 7 in points per game in his first full year as the starter. And, people have a lot to say about Brock Purdy, whether or not this is the system, how good of a quarterback he is. But the thing here with Purdy is that as long as he's good enough to retain the starting job, like, he's going to be a very strong fantasy option. Just paired with Kyle Shanahan, the weapons he has, especially in the short term, Ayuk, Debo, CMC, Kittle, you add in Ricky Pearsall. Like, this is a stacked unit with a great offensive-minded head coach. He's always going to lack the upside because of the rushing production, but year to year, he's just going to be a back-end QB1 as long as he can retain that starting job. Now, shifting into Tier 6, we're going to go with Deshaun Watson. He's just kind of an odd player to rank here because prior to the suspension and him sitting out a year, like, Deshaun Watson was pretty much like a locked-in top 5 NFL quarterback. He was truly elite, both in real life and fantasy. 20-plus points per game in each of his first 4 seasons. Then he's played in 6 games in back-to-back seasons, under 15 points per game in both of those. So just an insane fall-off, after the year off and then the suspension. It's like maybe he bounces back. I don't know how you are so amazing and then all of a sudden you just suck. Maybe he just continues sucking, right? It's kind of like an in-between spot where you pick him here, he could definitely fall off in value. Like, if he looks terrible again over a full season, his value's in the toilet. But who knows? Maybe he bounces back and you're getting a crazy value here with him as the quarterback 18. Behind Watson, we're going with Tua. And I think Tua's in an interesting spot here. With McDaniel at head coach, he's been the quarterback 9 and quarterback 16 in points per game. He's heading into the last year on his rookie deal. He'll probably get extended, even though, like, personally, I think it might be kind of crazy to pay him big money. But from a fantasy perspective, like, he's paired with a top offensive-minded head coach. He has Tyreek Hill. He has Jalen Waddle. He has a great run game. But it seems like his ceiling is just always going to be capped because, like, I've talked about some limited rushing upside. Like, of all the dudes I've talked about, Tua is by far the most limited. Like, he is the rare modern-day, like, statue quarterback. You don't see it a lot in today's NFL, but he is that. Like, he is giving you pretty much zero on the ground, especially after all the concussion stuff. Like, it's just not happening. So I think this is like a fine spot to rank him. He's in a really strong situation here. It's pretty much just going to be like, do the Dolphins commit to him long term? If they do, he'll obviously pay off. If they don't, then obviously he's going to be in a pretty rough spot. Also in tier 6, going with rookie Bo Nix. Some people might think this is high, but I do think like 12th overall draft capital in this draft is legit, especially in a quarterback heavy class. Like, this wasn't a Kenny Pickett situation where he gets round 1 capital, but it's like the only quarterback picked in round 1. You could argue that in a weaker quarterback class, he's locked in top 10 going earlier. So, you know, I think this is a fine spot. He's Sean Payton's guy. He's going to have a legit opportunity to have that starting spot and maintain it. Like, it seems like this is kind of Sean Payton's last stand. Like, if this doesn't work out, he's probably done. So he's kind of all in here on Bo Nix. And he's also not like a statue quarterback, has some rushing upside, obviously not, you know, top tier, but can give you something on the ground. And then we're going to have 2 more younger quarterbacks. First up is going to be Will Levis here. Not a great rookie season production-wise, but on like the bright side, the Titans have really committed to fielding a solid unit around him, at least in the short term. They added Calvin Ridley, added Tyler Boyd, they upgraded the offensive line, and I think Levis has the physical tools to be a really solid fantasy quarterback. There's no guarantee it happens, but the ability is there, and he's going to have the opportunity to show it this season. And the other second-year quarterback that I have him ranked ahead of is going to be Bryce Young here. Young coming off a pretty brutal rookie season. Honestly, just like everything was bad. He didn't play well. The supporting cast was just awful. Coaching staff also not very good. My concern here with Bryce Young is that I feel like even if he takes a huge leap forward and bounces back, his ceiling is just so limited from a fantasy perspective. He doesn't have much rushing upside. Pretty small dude. He could rack up some yardage, but like he's not going to be a goal line guy. He's not going to be scoring a ton of rushing touchdowns. And he also just doesn't have like plus arm talent for an NFL quarterback. And so it just feels like his fantasy ceiling is like a low-end QB1. Looking at the positives though, the Panthers at least made an effort to improve the supporting cast. They, traded for Deontay Johnson, drafted Xavier Legette. I do think Dave Canales is a really bright offensive mind who they brought in as a head coach. So there's definitely improvements around him. I just feel like we're in a spot where there's no guarantee he pans out. And then even if he does pan out, like the reward is nothing crazy. It's just like a solid, like fringe QB1. So that's where I'm at with Bryce Young. And then my final tier 6 quarterback is going to be Jared Goff. Just a solid like fantasy quarterback too. He's been the quarterback 14 and 11 in points per game over the past 2 years. Very strong offensive core around him. Really good offensive line. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, both those dudes are studs. Gibbs, Montgomery at running back. He'll turn 30 during the season, so getting up there in age a little bit, but it does seem like the Lions are looking to extend him. So just should be a solid piece in your fantasy lineups, especially Superflex. And then the final quarterback here, this is a start of a new, much larger tier. I went with Baker Mayfield, but you really could have gone with a bunch of different players. Last year, Baker was a mid-tier QB2 fantasy-wise. He re-signs with the Bucs on a 3-year deal, has solid weapons around him, especially in the short term. I think on more like win-now rosters, you could go with a Matthew Stafford, a Kirk Cousins. If you're like full-on rebuilding, maybe a Michael Penix, or you're taking like a swing on Justin Fields panning out. Like I said, there's a bunch of dudes who could have filled in here, but Baker Mayfield is going to be my quarterback 24. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know your thoughts. What quarterbacks do you think should be higher or lower? Would love to hear it. So thank you all again, and I will see you in the next one.